Put the cell phones away. Lock them down. I know you're having withdrawal symptoms, but you can do this. Put the iPads down. Take it all down. If there are photographers, stay in the back of the room. We're going to have a nice conversation. It's always a pleasure to be in Spain and in Madrid, and thank you, everybody, for coming out. Some of these faces I kind of recognize. I've been here before. Thank you. Our scientists tell us that we are in the sixth extinction of life on Earth. It doesn't even make the headlines. This is the most dramatic story we have ever faced in the 200,000 years that our little species has been here. We've had 5 extinctions, mass extinctions on this planet in 450 million years, way before we are here. Remember, we're the babies. We are the youngest species, 200,000 years, very short period of time. We've had 5 mass extinctions over 450 million years, and each time there was a tipping point in the chemistry of the planet, massive quick die-out, and on the average 10 million years to get new forms of life inhabiting this planet. We are in the 6th extinction event, and our scientists are chronicling it. This isn't a model or a projection. We're chronicling the extinctions. And I want every young person about to get married and every parent and grandparent to hear this. Our scientists are telling us that we could lose upwards of 50% or more of all the species inhabiting the Earth in the next 8 decades. We'll never hear them again. We'll never see them again. They've been here for millions of years. The last time we had an extinction on this magnitude was 65 million years ago, and it took place over thousands of years. We are asleep, right? The young people, though, are waking us up. The Gen Zs, the younger millennials under the age of 30, they've taken to the streets 3 times now, student strikes, left their schools on Fridays, millions of them, 130 countries. This is not like any protest we've ever seen in history. Let's step back and understand what's happening here. They're calling for a climate emergency. They're calling for a global Green New Deal. And this isn't like protests in the past. We've had protests all through our history. We're a protesting species. But this is the first planetary revolt ever of the human race. Never happened before. There was always protest and the other, protest and the other. For the first time in history, we have millions of young people all over the world who are beginning to identify as a species. This is new. And they're beginning to see themselves as an endangered species and beginning to empathize with the common plight that they all face. And even more interesting, they're beginning to understand that our fellow creatures are part of our evolutionary family, and if they're imperiled, we're imperiled. They're actually beginning to understand that we are part of a larger community where there is no boundaries, there are no borders. The lithosphere, the biosphere, the hydrosphere, the magnetosphere, the circadian, the lunar, the circannual rhythms, the solar and wind, they don't know our boundaries. They interact at all times, and everything that happens on this planet at every moment affects everything else. That's the cruel lesson of climate change, isn't it? But it's also the silver lining. We never had the agency that we thought we had. We thought we could control this planet. It was passive matter. We could remake it in our own image. And Condorcet, before he was taken to the guillotine in that prison cell in the French Revolution, he penned a little letter. He said, "There is no limit to the perfectibility of the human race except the duration of the globe." That was the age of progress. Does anyone here think that we're still there? What we did is it was an indiscretion. What we did is we went back 300 million years in time, and we went down into the burial grounds of a previous geological period in history, the Carboniferous era, and we exhumed the dead bodies of plant and animal life that lived then in the form of coal, oil, and natural gas, and then we transformed those assets into the entire civilization. Our fertilizers, our pesticides, our construction materials, our pharmaceutical products, our food additives and preservatives, our synthetic fiber, our packaging, our power, our transport, our heat and light, it's all made out of those burial grounds. And the fiction is we thought that we were creating wealth out of nothing when we were really borrowing from the burial ground that we should have left untouched. The result, we've spewed massive amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere and methane and nitrous oxide, and now we are in real-time global warming. It's really not climate change, it's global warming. And I want to explain what global warming is, because if what I'm about to explain was described to let's say we could get 1 minute on the Super Bowl game to describe this, it would change everything. The whole human race would get it, would be on target, and every family would understand what we need to do. Here's what climate change does, global warming. It changes the hydrological cycle of the Earth. We're the watery planet, right? We go to other planets, no water, not interested. We went to Mars, oh, they think there's dirty water there, and everybody's excited. We're going to re-inhabit another planet. Good luck. So our ecosystems over millions of years have developed based on the hydrological cycle that traverses through the clouds and bathes the biomes and ecosystems, and we have life. Here's the rub. For every 1 degree that the temperature goes up on this Earth from global warming emissions, and let me explain why that's happening, the carbon that we're putting up, the CO2, the methane, the nitrous oxide, those molecules are blocking the sun's heat from getting back off the planet. So for every 1 degree Celsius that temperature goes up on the Earth, the atmosphere is sucking up 7% more precipitation from the ground. The heat is forcing the precipitation into the clouds. So we're getting more concentrated precipitation in the clouds and wild, unpredictable water events. Blockbuster winter snows, 70 below zero up there in northern Canada and the Arctic, and blockbuster snows, that's not normal. I'm just going to use my country, the United States, because you can duplicate it in any continent in the world. We're getting spring floods across the entire middle section of America, across the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, from Minnesota down to the Gulf. And all the farmland is underwater. For 4 months this year, 10 feet of water. We couldn't grow the crops. The federal government had to subsidize the farmers. They lost their homes. They don't have flood insurance. They're now doubling up and meeting and going to relatives' homes in other parts of the country, and we have small towns evacuating. They're not coming back. It's getting worse every spring. We have summer droughts and wildfires, especially across the western part of the United States. Los Angeles was on fire last week. People died, and PG&E, the electric utility, had to shut off all the electricity across all of Northern California, the 5th largest economy in the world, because they were fearful the fire would go across the entire state and burn it. A typhoon, for example, hit Japan this last week, and it was extraordinary for them. We have hurricane season starting in August, and we're battered. We had 5 hurricanes in the last 7 weeks. And one of them just destroyed the Bahamas. This is the new normal. This is not going to get better. The question is, can we abate it to keep it under 1.5 degree rise? Because if we go up to 1.5 degree, our scientists in the UN panel on climate change are saying a cascading runaway hydrological cycle and events. Our ecosystems, they can't catch up to the shift in the water cycle. It's too short a time for their evolution. Their ecosystems are collapsing, and our species are dying. What do? The UN panel on climate change issued a sober report last year. They said, okay, we've got 12 years left now. We run out of time. We're going to have to transform the entire civilization. The whole playbook has to be thrown out. We got to start anew and figure out how to do this. So we need to step back and first say, look, we need a new economic vision for the world, correct? We need a game plan to deliver on the vision. It's got to be quick, over the next 15 to 20 years. We're going to have to be off a carbon-based civilization in a very short period of time. So we need to step back and ask the question, how do the great economic revolutions and paradigms, how do they occur in history? If we know how they occur, we'll get a roadmap in Spain, the EU, and all over the world, and we'll get a compass that maybe can give us a new journey, right? Well, this is interesting. What I'm about to say is not in a single textbook in the world, but I hope you think it was common sense, all right? There have been at least 7 or 8 major paradigm shifts in history. They're very interesting anthropologically because they all share a common denominator. And that is, at a moment of time, often it's serendipitous, across a civilization, 3 technologies emerge and converge to create a social infrastructure that fundamentally changes the way society communicates, powers itself, and has mobility. What are those 3 technologies? Number 1, new communication technology revolutions that can bring more people together over time and space so they can have a collective life together. Number 2, new sources of energy that can bring larger collectivities of people together so they can have a more collective social life. And number 3, new modes of mobility so larger collectives can come together in a new social arrangement. When communication revolutions converge with new energy regimes, new modes of mobility and logistics, it changes our temporal spatial orientation. It changes our built environment where we live and work. It changes our economic models. It changes our governance. It changes our narrative. It changes how we perceive our relationship to the world. Let me give you 2 quick examples. First industrial revolution, Britain, the 19th century. Second industrial revolution, the U.S., 20th century. Okay, so the Brits take us into the first industrial revolution. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit before that tonight. You had one of the great 7 or 8 infrastructure transformations in history in medieval Europe. What happened is, around the 1400s, Gutenberg comes out with a print press. No more codex. Now you have the ability to go from small oral cultures in small communities, and with literacy, you could communicate across large territories with print, correct? And then we had literacy, not to mention the Protestant Reformation. And so that communication revolution was very substantial, but then you did something else. You found a new source of energy. The new cities that were emerging in the medieval era, they erected thousands and thousands of windmills and water mills. It was called the people's power. The aristocracy living out in the farmlands didn't have it. Then the third, mobility, you then took all the rivers and you created canals to connect all the cities across Europe. You still have them, correct? That new infrastructure gave rise to a new economic system, guilds, right? It was a transformation, brought larger collectivities together over time and space. First industrial revolution, Britain, same convergence. The new communication was steam power printing, not manual printing. So you could put out lots of communication, very cheap, and you could have textbooks, something cheap for universal education. Otherwise, it would have been unaffordable. And then you introduced the telegraph system in the UK in the last part of the 19th century. So steam power printing and the telegraph converged with a new source of energy in Britain, cheap coal, harvested by the same steam engine you use for communication. Then you put the steam engine on rails for tracks, locomotives, national or industrial life, and that brought larger collectivities together. You compressed time and space so they could communicate, find energy, and have mobility, and you created national markets in Britain. And with national markets, you created nation states to secure the markets, right? They went right parallel with it. The second industrial revolution in the United States, another convergence. In this case, the telephone was a really big deal. I know everyone thinks the internet's a big deal, but try to imagine your great-grandparents in the first time in history talking over a device and someone's listening 1,000 miles away. You know the word phony? You're a phony? It came from telephones. people thought it was not sincere, that it was a magic trick, that it was phony, it wasn't a real person. It took a while for them to get used to that. Telephones, later radio and television in the United States converged with new energy. Texas oil came in. Then Henry Ford put everyone in the Model T Ford. We built out the interstate highways, suburban build-out, new infrastructure, new habitats, shopping malls, travel and tourism. That second industrial revolution took the entire world through the 20th century. Now, let me step back for a moment and take a look at what this meant. Each of these revolutions of infrastructure, and infrastructure are not just bridges and roads, each of these infrastructures that brought larger collectivities together over time and space, those infrastructures tell you a lot, the way they're engineered, about what the opportunities are and the restraints. And within that, economic systems come to manage it and new forms of governance to oversee it. It's not ironclad, but they give you the opportunities and restraints. So I mentioned medieval Europe, the guilds. The first industrial revolution and second were designed to be centralized, top-down, enmeshed in intellectual property protection, and they had to vertically integrate their organizations to create economies of scale to secure the investments, because fossil fuels are literally the most expensive energies in history to extract and refine and move. So you needed big vertical integrated organizations to manage them. And railroads were massive. They needed huge amounts of money, vertical integration. So what did this mean? Capitalism. So no monarchy could finance fossil fuel extraction or create the locomotives across continents. So the stockholding corporation came about in modern capitalism so we could have millions of players putting in their capital, and this could finance that. Every other organization also had to vertically integrate across countries because they were also made out of or moved by fossil fuels. So what we ended up with is, by the end of the second industrial revolution, we have 500 global companies. I know them because I taught many of those CEOs. I taught the advanced management program, our 5-week CEO program at the Wharton School for 15 years, every session. So I know a lot of these folks. We have 500 global companies. They are responsible now for 1/3 of the GDP, vertically integrated to the top. They only have 67 million employees. Our workforce is 3.5 billion. Does that tell you something? And the 7 richest people on this pyramid, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, they're nice guys, Zuckerberg, 7 individuals, we could put them in this role. Their combined wealth now equals the accumulated wealth of 1/2 the human beings living on Earth, 3.5 billion people. What do you think of that? Capitalism didn't create the infrastructure. Infrastructure created the conditions for capitalism. That's not in a single textbook in the world. Well, it's in my books now, but who knows if they read them, is what I say. The young people aren't reading too much. I guess I write them for myself pretty much. So what's interesting about this is we are now seeing that the second industrial revolution, centralized telecommunication, fossil fuel, nuclear power, internal combustion transport, they're dying. But let me add one more thing. If what I'm saying to you seems like common sense, you know why it is? Because these infrastructures we create to communicate, power ourselves, have mobility, change our built environments, if that sounds familiar to you, it's because you took biology. Every cell in every organism of every species has to have a means to communicate. It has to have a source of energy to maintain itself in a non-equilibrium state away from death. It has to have some form of motility and mobility to survive. And it has to have a semi-permeable membrane to connect the inside with the outside in the rhythms of the earth. That's what our infrastructures do. And the semi-permeable membrane is our buildings, our infrastructure, our habitats. This is common sense. This is how we become a collective social animal. The third industrial revolution. We know the second industrial revolution is peaked. Its ratio of potentially useful work, what we call aggregate efficiency in engineering. The economists don't know about this, but the chemists, the biologists, the architects, the engineers do. Only 14% of productivity is machines and better workers. Much of the other 86% is what we call aggregate efficiency, the ratio of useful to potential work in each conversion. Let me explain this. This is thermodynamics. Not a single business school in the world teaches the first and second laws of thermodynamics, which govern all activity in the universe. Does that give you an idea of where economics is? Every engineering school, chemists, biologists do. I won't go into it in detail. We take available low entropy energy out of nature. It could be a rare earth, a fossil fuel, a metallic ore. We extract it, we ship it, we store it, we produce goods and services, we consume it, we recycle it back to nature. In every single conversion across this value chain, we have to embed a certain amount of energy and material into that good or service to get it to the next stage of its journey. In the process of each conversion, we're going to lose some of that energy. That's the ratio of useful to potential work. So when Chancellor Merkel came in, she asked me to visit her in the first few weeks to address the question how to grow the German economy. And I said to her, look, Madam Chancellor, what I'm going to tell you is you can have market reform, fiscal reform, labor reform. You can stimulate all sorts of jobs. It won't make any difference because they're now plugging into a second industrial revolution infrastructure for collective life. And as aggregate efficiency peaked, we have the numbers in every industrial country in the world in the last 15 years, at around 18 to 20% aggregate efficiency. So on that first day, we talked about a third industrial revolution, a new convergence of communication, energy, mobility, and built environment to manage power and move Germany. And at the end of the day, she said, we will have this third industrial revolution for Germany and for Europe. So what is it? This is already emerging. Everything I'm about to say is emerging. We haven't scaled it yet. And this is our hope. Where the communication internet is in. It's 29 years since the World Wide Web, 4.5 billion people connected, and now China and Korea have a smartphone for $25 with more computing power than sent our astronauts to the moon. There are literally villagers in the Amazon with more power, as this is potentially power to the people, potentially, in quotes. Now this communication internet, which is digital and run by algorithm governance, is just now converging with a digitized renewable energy internet. There are millions and millions of people now, homeowners, small businesses, farmers, neighborhood associations. They've all created cooperatives. And they're collecting the sun and wind where they are. And what they're not using, they're sending it back to a digitized renewable energy internet with the same big data and analytics to manage it as we use. They're sharing energy just the way we're sharing news, entertainment, and knowledge on the communication internet. It's identical. Each feeds in the other. Then these two internets, communication and energy internet, are converging with a third internet, a digitized mobility and logistics internet made up of electric and fuel cell vehicles, and they're powered by solar and wind increasingly from the energy internet. And all the major car companies, I work with several of them, they're beginning to use 3D fabricated recycled material and moving to biological processes for the new bodies. They're lighter, they're cheaper. And all of these vehicles will be autonomous over the next 8 or 9 years, managed by the same big data that we use with our satellite synchronizations with the sensors. These three internets, to bring together a larger collective society over time and space, to manage power and move day-to-day life. These three internets ride on top of a built environment, our new semi-permeable membranes. Every building is turning into an Internet of Things. So we're retrofitting the buildings to make them energy efficient because of climate adversity. And then they're becoming nodes. They're becoming nodes. Every building becomes a edge data center. How many here have heard of the term edge data center? 1, 2, 3. I was at SciPo the other night with the graduate divisions. We had 10 people in the audience. They're real excited. They're working on it. They're on the right track. These edge data centers are increasingly going to allow commercial, institutional buildings, homeowners to begin to connect their data in very agile lateral networks, virtually and physically, and in cooperatives, SMEs, all over the world. We're going to look back, I don't know why I smile, we're going to look back at these clunky, what happened is the first generation in Silicon Valley, the Xers and the older millennials, they tried to take these vertical integrated models of a second industrial revolution infrastructure and push it onto a third industrial revolution infrastructure. But it doesn't fit because if you know anything about digital technology, this infrastructure in the third industrial revolution is designed, it's engineering to be distributed. It works best if it's open and transparent. You get the network effect, not winners and losers. It's not a zero-sum game. It wants to laterally scale. So I think what we're going to see is these giant Apple institutions, Apple, Facebook, Airbnb, Uber. The younger generation in Greenport, Brooklyn, here in Madrid and Barcelona and London and Seoul, Korea, the 20-year-olds, they're creating high-tech SMEs in cooperatives, in communities, and then they're blockchaining and beginning to in platforms, virtual and physical, with other cooperatives all over the world. They're more agile. These big clunky data centers and these big centralized organizations cannot compete with thousands and hundreds of thousands of SMEs in cooperatives, blockchain virtually and physically. We'll look back at this as kind of a short interim. This third industrial revolution is, again, it's designed to be distributed, open, transparent, and laterally scaled. And this changes everything. On the upside, we're bringing the human race together. We're creating a brain and nervous system. All those sensors are connecting us. Smart homes, smart vehicles, smart road systems, smart warehouses. They're all collecting data. By 2030, we're going to begin to connect humanity. The upside is the brain is a Galileo and GPS. And they're synchronizing the other satellites, all those sensors. So we're bringing the human race together, and the digital natives under 40, they're Skyping on global classrooms when they're in school. They were on Facebook. They're getting out already of Facebook, but they're now in various platforms where they're creating figurative families. They are engaged in massive open online college courses and getting college credits. And the most amazing thing to me, Wikipedia. I don't know how Jimmy Wales came up with it. I thought it would fail. Think about this. We've democratized knowledge in 10 years, and we're not even celebrating it. The whole human race is now telling the story. Is this democratization of knowledge? You bet. And apparently everyone has nothing else to do, because I put something up on the web, and within an hour, everyone's crawling over this. You missed that. Here's an amplification. Where's your footnote? You know, you've all done this, right? This website is the 5th largest website, and if you remove all the porno websites, I'm sure it's #1. And it only costs $50 million in donations. It's nonprofit, and none of this is in the GDP. So what's happening is we're beginning to see a very big change in capitalism, which I'd like to share with you. It's quite interesting. Remember I said the platform of an infrastructure tells you about the kind of economic system and governance that might emerge from it? Well, what's happening with this third industrial revolution infrastructure, it's fascinating. I first introduced this to my Wharton A&P classes when I wrote the Age of Access book back in 2000. Anybody read that book? Don't worry. No one in my family's read any of them. One guy. That's fine. Okay. So what's happened is markets are too slow for the digital connection of the world. All right? Markets are transactional. You have a seller, you have a buyer, they come together for a moment of time, they alienate the good or service, then they're over. In between these transactions, you have downtime. You have to pay for your employees, the insurance, your marketing, your advertising, your logistics, your warehouses. Too slow. In a digital world, what's happening is, as we digitize this grid, these grids, the marginal cost is plummeting. Fixed cost is plummeting, marginal cost is plummeting. We always teach our students that the optimum market in capitalism is where you sell at marginal cost. We just never expected a digital revolution where the marginal cost would get so low, your profits start to shrink. When your profits shrink, you can't afford markets. They're too slow. They're transactional. We are moving from ownership to access. We are moving from sellers and buyers to providers and users. We are moving from transactions to flows. We are moving from productivity to regenerativity. We are moving from externalities to circularity. We're moving from GDP to quality of life indicators. So when the margins get so low, you have to move to flows, because with flows, the providers are providing the service 24/7, so there's no downtime. It's low margins, but they can keep those margins on those networks. Some of the margins are getting so low, they're going to near zero, and that's created the sharing economy. Some of it's being absorbed into the capitalist networks. Some of it is independent of those networks. like Wikipedia, for example. Let me be clear in my thoughts. I think the sharing economy is the first new economic system to enter onto the world stage since capitalism in the 18th century and socialism in the 19th century. What I'm telling you, all of this fits a new economic model that's beyond the capitalist system as we know, all right? It's something new because it fits the lateral, distributed, open, transparent infrastructure that we're working with. It's going to be a big deal to figure out how it all ends up. But it certainly suggests a more distributed form of sharing the bounty of the earth, doesn't it? And this system is forcing us now to go from globalization to glocalization. Absolutely. In the regions I travel around the world, we have smart SMEs and cooperatives in local regions. They're all engaged with other regions all over the world. They're bypassing nation states. They don't need them. They're bypassing Fortune 500 companies by and large. What do they need them for? It's so cheap, virtually and physically, to market or to move on platforms virtually and physically. Why not just do it? This is a revolution. It's just beginning. It hasn't scaled. Now, having said that, let me go back to where we are. I'm going to give you what will be bad news for some people and institutions and really good news for some people in this audience. The second industrial revolution is dying. Every infrastructure has a birth, a life, and a death. When it reaches its maximum aggregate efficiency, it dies. Does anybody here think we're in the sunrise of the second industrial revolution and the fossil fuel civilization? How about the crest or even the plateau? We smell it's dying. We know it. So here's what's happened. In 2019, and all of this is in the book, and everything I'm telling you from now on is based on internal documents and studies. They're public, but no one looks at them. In the last 18 months, from the banking community, the financial industry, the insurance industry, all the various industrial sectors, the consulting agencies, all footnoted. None of this is my little imaginative projection. You can see it all there, all in the last 18 months. What's happened is this year, 2019, the levelized cost of solar and wind utility scale has just gone below natural gas. Way below nuclear, way below coal, now below natural gas. We have to understand, and it continues the fixed cost to plunge. It's on the same exponential curve as computers. The first computers cost millions of dollars. The chairman of IBM said, we're going to need 5 computers for the world. Yes, that was a little off. The Intel engineers began in the 1970s to double the capacity on those chips every 2 years. Now, $25 smartphone. This is happening in solar and wind. You know what one solar watt fixed cost was $78 in the late 70s. It's 43 cents tonight. It's 35 cents in 18 months from now. And if you're in the industry, you'll hear these figures. In the last 2 years, the power and utility companies, many of whom I work with, are quietly buying long-term 20-year contracts for solar and wind because they know the exponential curves at 5 cents, 4 cents, 3 cents, and 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Citigroup was the first to see what was up. Back in 2015, I think it was, they said, oh my God, we could be, they didn't say that. We could be facing $100 trillion in stranded assets across the fossil fuel civilization. Others have made other projections. The intelligence unit of The Economist says, worst case scenario in this century, we could lose at least 40 trillion. Whatever it is, this is the largest bubble in history because what's happening is, as solar and wind plunge in fixed costs, and they're going to continue to go down, 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 they're already below everyone, the marginal cost is near zero. Once you get the fixed cost. The sun has not sent us a single bill. The wind has not yet invoiced us. How does the second industrial revolution infrastructure that you plug into compete with that? All right? So what's happening here is in the fossil fuel complex, stranded assets are occurring across the following domains. First, what's happening is all the exploration rights they buy, they're pretty expensive. They'll never amortize out over the next 30 years because the assets are stranded because we don't need them. And all of the fossil fuels under the ground and on the ocean floor, we're not going to use them because they're more expensive than solar and wind. And all the gas pipelines they're still putting in, they're going to be abandoned. You will never advertise them now over 30 years. And all the gas-fired power plants we thought we needed for backup, for intermittent solar and wind, we don't need them now because batteries have plunged 75% in the last 4 years. And because as we digitize this grid everywhere using algorithm governance, and as everyone has advanced meters like you do that go from your house to there, they can use this digital algorithm governance to smooth out peak and base loads and demand and supply at any given time on the grid. And all the refineries we set up, we won't use. This is the biggest bubble in all of history. Mark Carney, President of the Bank of England, he was the first to say, we got to deal with this. He went to Lloyd's of London, they had a dinner, said we got to deal with it. They have set up a task force. He's responsible for task force for the global financial community, and they're now demanding that each bank and financial institute set up metrics on potential stranded assets and how to reappoint their financial investments so they don't go under. $11 trillion has now exited fossil fuels in 4 years. Does that sound like something small to you? 11 trillion. And it's being led by public pension funds. This is kind of interesting. I wrote a book on this with another young man when we were kids on pension funds. Karl Marx could never envision what I'm about to tell you. He'd be flipping in his grave. Everyone on the left, we all rail against capitalism. Well, who are the capitalists? Well, wake up. It's all the working people of the world who have pension funds. It's all the people who are employed, hundreds of millions of them, who have their wages deferred, then invested for their retirement. This is the largest pool of capital on the planet and the best kept secret, even from those who are the new owners of the world. $41 trillion, the largest pool of capital. What's happened now is this. The pension funds saw what happened with the coal industry going bankrupt in my country in the last 4 years because natural gas was cheaper, then solar and wind was cheaper, and so the coal industry went bankrupt. None of the workers got their pension funds. So now the big public pension funds, public employees, they're getting out. New York and London and Melbourne, all the big cities have gotten out in the last 24 months. I'm sure you're reading about it. It's not just because of ESG. That was the little foundations of the universities. This is about they don't want to have hundreds of millions of workers around the world stranded while these complex fossil fuel investments are abandoned and then it's gone. Now the private pension funds, the family funds, I'm with the financial community every month around the world. I wouldn't say it's panic yet. I would say it's like almost panic now. All right? What this means is this is actually good news. The market is speaking, and there's nothing more powerful than the market here. I know people say, oh, the fossil fuel industry, they're so powerful. They have the lobbyists, the special interests. They'll do anything. They're so nasty. It doesn't make any difference. But I will say this. The market didn't do this alone. Let me be clear as why the market is speaking and why the prices have gone down. Because in the European Union, the European Commission, and the European Parliament established a 20-20-20 formula, 20% increase in aggregate efficiency, 20% reduction in global warming gases, and the big one, 20% renewable energy by 2020. By putting that mandate in, and I know I was there, Angelo Consley, my European director, somewhere, we actually wrote the resolution that passed the Parliament, and then the Commission joined with us. Ours was a little higher standards. We wanted 25%, but we compromised. And so when they put in that mandate, what happened after that mandate is every country then put in feed-in tariffs, and that allowed people to create cooperatives for solar and wind because they were going to get more money sending it back to the grid, right? And the banks were pleased to do it because they know they'd be paid back by the energy they generated. Cooperatives established this across Europe. And by the way, this is why I'll get back to this, how the power industry went down. They couldn't scale this. They could scale big fossil fuel deposits, but how does a power and utility company, how do they capture the entire landscape, every rooftop and every piece of land? You can't do it. You have to collect it where you live and work. All right, we'll get back to that in a minute. But so what's happened here is that we're in a huge disruption that they didn't get. There are 4 power companies in Germany. EnBW, I worked with Utz Clausen when he was there, EnBW, RWE, E.ON, and Vattenfall. They didn't see the disruption because they didn't understand the nature of disruptions. Even Schumpeter didn't get it. It was too naive. The big disruptions are infrastructure, communication, energy, mobility. Try to imagine when that print press of Martin Luther used replaced codex and oral culture. That's a pretty big disruption, right? Or try to imagine when we went from letter carriers to the telegraph and the telephone. Or try to imagine when we went from horses to locomotives. These are the big ones. And here's what they didn't notice. It's fascinating. Because the canary in the mines was Germany. Around 2002 or 3, solar and wind, they're a tiny part of the grid. Who the hell cares? What they didn't understand about infrastructure disruptions, it's not how big the incumbent is or how much of the market the incumbent has, how powerful the incumbent is. It's how fast the challenger is growing into the market. So when we hit 14% solar and wind on the German electricity grid, the power companies didn't see it coming. It was over because investments saw that solar and wind was moving very fast and fossil fuel and nuclears were slowing down, and a smart investment shift their allegiances. You know how much losses we had between 2010 and 2015 alone? Over 280 billion, not just in Germany, around the utilities in Europe, much more now. It happened. 14% is the inflection point. The U.S. reaches 14% solar and wind electricity in 2023. Globally, we reach 14% solar and wind global electricity 2028. They're decoupling. That's energy. Communication, the other part of the infrastructure. All the ICT and telecom and internet companies are decoupling or have already done it. All their data centers and some of these companies like Apple, Google, they're either totally off-grid on solar and wind or they will be 100% off in a few years, and Microsoft and Intel and Cisco, they're going off. It's cheaper and it's more secure. Finally, there's transport. We only have 2.5% annual sales of electric vehicles today, but the Bloomberg did an interesting study, Bloomberg Energy and Transport. By 2023, EVs will be competitive without subsidies, with internal combustion. By 2026, they'll be cheaper. By 2028, 20% of the vehicles in the world will be electric vehicles, annual sales in 2028. How serious is the transport industry taking this? I met with the chief technology officers, the powertrains around the world about 6 weeks ago. We all got together. They're all doing it. Let me show you Volkswagen. Volkswagen is the biggest. I think they compete with Toyota. I think they're the biggest right now. Volkswagen announced in June that they're putting out the last internal combustion powertrain ever in 2026. It's ever. That's it. They also are putting together their $80 billion commitment. Did you hear that? One company, $80 billion to move into electric vehicles, and they're going to put out 22 million of them, 1/4 of global annual sales in 2028. And they've connected with Bechtel, and they're putting in 35,000 charging stations across Europe in the next 4 years. Daimler, BMW, they're all moving on this. Why is this important? We consume 93 million barrels of oil a day in the world. 2/3 of it goes to transport. They're all going to be EVs with solar and wind from the electricity internet. We're seeing the collapse of the fossil fuel civilization, but we've got a problem. Trillions and trillions of dollars are getting out, and they're desperately seeking to invest in this third industrial revolution infrastructure and a Green New Deal across the world. And guess what? The regions and cities of the world are not ready. They create infrastructure. We have 9,000 cities that have signed up for the Global Covenant of Mayors for climate. And if you go to those 9,000 cities, the mayor will show you their wonderful, beautiful, shiny 10 electric buses. There are 20 zero-emission buildings. Their beautiful little electronically regulated bike path. And you take a photo. What's happening, these trillions of dollars investment that have gotten out of fossil fuels are desperate for regions to scale up the kind of infrastructure revolution we had in the 19th century with the first industrial revolution and the 20th century in the second, and they're being stopped. So what you have to do in Spain, your government's called for a Green New Deal. You got to set up a green bank right now in Spain, and then all of your regions have to set up a green bank. Then you have to issue green bonds, and the money will flow if your regions have deployable big infrastructure projects. You don't even need more taxes. There's so much money, and they're willing to take very low returns on bonds just to have the stability over years to be able to maintain their funds for their workers. We're probably going to have to deal with the Stability Pact, however, which says you cannot have more than 3% deficit to GDP, right, in your budget. And now there's movement afoot. I can just tell you, there's movement afoot here. And there are now, in the new commission, they're starting to have some talk around Europe that we should make one exception in the Stability Pact, and that's to build out this infrastructure. Because all the money is there, you don't have to increase taxes. You have a little bit of short-term debt, a deficit to budget, to GDP, but it's paid back by all of the infrastructure you put in and all the jobs and all the business opportunities. So that's got to be dealt with. The infrastructures are not going to go the way our Democratic nominees in the U.S. would like to do the Green New Deal. I'm sure you're following all the presidential nominees, Bernie, I love Bernie Sanders, and Warren. If you look at their programs, it's a romanticized vision of the F. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's plan in the 1930s. And I love all these people. These are my kindred spirits. But all of their plans are a shopping list of we're going to put 10 billion here, 20 billion there, 30 billion there, all federal government, and they'll deploy this across America. First of all, none of that is the story I told you tonight. They're all isolated laundry lists. If you went to China tonight and you went into any room in China and asked, do they understand the Third Industrial Revolution, everyone would raise their hands. And that's because Premier Lee read the Third Industrial Revolution. I never knew him. I thought it was a joke at first. He put it out in his biography. He read the book, and he instructed the central government to follow the narrative I'm giving to you tonight. They moved very quick. I've been working with the leadership there and trying to bring them together with the European leadership, which we're doing, and everyone in China knows the story. So what we have here is we have a laundry list, and all the Democratic nominees for president are thinking the federal government will do this, like in 1932, big TVA dams, and will employ millions of people. Here's the one problem. 93% of the infrastructure in my country is owned by the states. Okay? Not a single mention among the candidates. All right? In Europe, we announced Smart Europe 2 years ago. I work with Meryl Sefcovic, the Vice President of the European Union, in charge of the Energy Union and Smart Europe and the Global Covenant of Mayors with Michael Bloomberg. So we got together with the President of the Committee of the Regions. We announced the plan, which this is the plan for a Green New Deal. Ursula von der Leyen just came in. She said, we're going to have a Green New Deal. She's the new president of the European Commission. And she said something interesting. She said, I have 7 children. This is going to happen. First of all, I don't know how she had 7 children and was the defense minister. She must have a pretty good house husband there or somebody. But she said, we're going to have a Green New Deal. This is the Smart Europe. The regions are going to do this. There's something called the Subsidiarity Principle, which everyone seems to ignore. It's the heart of the Master Treaty. And what that says is all power, as you know, not delegated to the EU, to the states, national governments, goes to the communities, because all power should start in the local regions. So Smart Europe, you send money from Spain to the EU, through the EIB, they send it back to the regions, they got to do the infrastructure. The problem is they're not ready. If you have a cement factory, some guy gets a road built because he wants a road built. What we have to do is these local regions are going to have to come together and create roadmaps with the whole region involved to lay out these infrastructures we're talking about customized to their region. The Spanish government will have to set the codes, the regulations, the standards, the alignment, the carrots and the sticks and targets, but the regions will have to create their infrastructure, and then the alignments will happen with the national government. In my country, the 50 states will do this, but the national governments will create the national electricity grid, high voltage distributed grid, with the states and the regions. This will happen around the world. We did this one time only in the U.S. While the states control most of it, the federal government put out the interstate highway system, because that was the backbone to connect everybody on communication, energy, and mobility. The backbone now for the third industrial revolution is the renewable energy internet across continents with high voltage potential, so everyone can share their energy with everyone else. There's also a parallel with security. When we did the National Interstate Highway Act, President Eisenhower was worried about a nuclear attack. How would people escape the cities? They needed highways with no traffic lights. Now, the real threat to security is not nuclear, it's always a threat. It's climate disasters that are becoming normal in cyber terrorist attack. So we want to build out the national system, and if it goes down, there's a power outage, et cetera, from the climate or cyber terrorism, you can go out and distribute and decentralize in your local grids and connect with each other in mini grids and keep your whole neighborhood and community going. That's already scaling a little bit in various regions. This is kind of the framework. And I want to end one part of this and then just close, and that is, when there's a climate disaster, how many of you have actually been in a climate disaster? Climate event disaster, only a few. I've been in one hurricane, not too bad, but power off for a week. It wasn't too bad, nobody killed. In a real climate disaster, no government, no central government can handle it, and no local government can handle it alone. What happens is they ad hoc wise, thousands of people come together. The NGOs, the churches, the mosques, the synagogues, the students. This is where you see the best of the empathic spirit in our neural circuitry. People all risk their lives for each other, all the time. And what's happening is climate disasters are going to be more normal. They're like now every month, they're every week. We're facing these hurricanes every couple of weeks. So what's happening is they're beginning to create these ad hoc peer assemblies. And so every time there's a disaster, all these organizations come together with government to learn from what happened, then to adapt, learn and adapt. If you know pragmatism science, Dewey and Mead, it's kind of like that. You learn to adapt. But now they're coming so regularly, these disasters, that we're beginning to look to formalize these peer assembly governances all the time. The whole community is going to have to be engaged. This is the age of resilience. This is peer assemblies, just like grand juries. So we've done this in 3 regions: Northern Industrial France, the Industrial Rust Belt. We're in our 6th year there. And when the region came to us, the president said, will you do a roadmap? We said, absolutely not. It's going to sit on a shelf. Some minister's going to do it. We don't want to waste our time. I said, if you go back to the Industrial Rust Belt, the whole region, get every mayor, every university, every high school, every chamber of commerce, every labor union, come back. I didn't think he would, frankly. He was very tenacious, President Pecheron. He came back. He was a socialist premier. He said, we got everyone lined up. I said, we still won't do it. He said, you got to be kidding. I said, no. But if you want to put together a peer assembly of thousands of people coming in with their ideas, not a stakeholder group, that's BS. Not a focus group, that's total BS. But if you want to put a peer assembly together, thousands of inputs, 300 people across every cohort, generation, and sector, we'll work with them for 12 months. They'll create the roadmap based on the Third Industrial Revolution, Infrastructure Green New Deal, customized to your region. They did it. And now we've done, in the Netherlands, 23 cities, Rotterdam to The Hague. They're in their 3rd year, peer assembly. Luxembourg in the 3rd year. What this shows is when people come together and they have to rely on themselves, you get technical expertise in these roadmaps that bypass any consulting organization I've ever come across. They're all open source on our website. Some of them are 500 pages long. They're totally complex. They bring all the expertise. They are amazing documents. What it says in climate events, we're all going to be engaged. This is not going to get better. And we can't expect a handful of government officials and police forces to do that. This is the age of resilience. Let me now say one last thing. Some of you know that I'm not a utopian on technology. I've been critical of a lot of technologies over my lifetime. But I think now we have the technology, the market speaking, we have the collapse of the fossil fuel civilization, so we're there. But now we need a younger generation that's taken to the streets, calling for a climate emergency, keep the protests up, keep vigilant, keep nonviolent, but that's not enough. If they're saying they want the government to do this for them, they're in for a rude awakening. The young people have to do what AOC did, Cortez. She's 28. She was tending bar. She ran for office. She's now a major figure, but we need millions of AOCs. In Spain, we need AOCs everywhere. The millennials and Gen Zs, they've got to go back to their communities, They got to change the curriculum in their school systems because it doesn't fit. That whole playbill doesn't fit. We were in Vatican University this week. I did a thing there, and 100 students in all the graduate divisions are coming together with the faculty to create interdisciplinary Green New Deal studies to transform the university curriculum. SciPo, same thing. So they have to go back to the communities, get in the NGOs, redo the education, run for political office, because the older generation, I'm probably the oldest one here, it's not that they don't care, but it's going to be the young people that have the fearlessness, if you will, and it's their generation that has to bear the consequences. Thomas Paine was a great American revolutionary during the Revolution. He said something that always caught my attention. He said, every generation must be free to remake the world anew and not be imprisoned by their ancestors in the grave. This has to happen. Last thought. I grew up in a geopolitical world. Post-Westphalia, nation-state, fossil fuel civilization. Every nation sovereign, every citizen of every nation sovereign. Every citizen competes with every other citizen for scarce resources in the marketplace. Zero-sum game, correct? There's winners and losers. Every nation competes with every other nation in the marketplace and in the battlefield for scarce resources on this planet. Winners and losers, zero-sum game, right? By the way, I don't have to remind you, Europe fought, and the world fought 2 world wars for coal in the Ruhr Valley between France and Germany and oil in the Bosphorus. Millions of people have died for fossil fuels. They're dying in Syria right now today for fossil fuels. We now have young people coming home, 12 and 13-year-olds. I'm talking about in the developing world everywhere, mainly middle class right now, but they're saying to their father, why are you using so much water here while you're shaving? We've got wildfires because of drought in this region, and this is something that the men don't want to hear and women. How the hell are we going to continue to have golf courses in Arizona being watered? I mean, really, this is more important than the extinction of the Earth's living species? And we have young people coming home and they're saying, why is the TV on? We haven't been in that room in 5 weeks. Do we really need background noise to calm ourselves? And why do we have 2 car shares? Why don't we car share? And here's the one I'm particularly fond of, and I'll preface it. Remember last month when President Macron got up? He was the only world leader, and he said to the president of Brazil, please stop the fires burning in the Amazon, right? This is the lungs of the planet. What Macron was inkling at, and I think he had an intuition of it, is that there are no borders in nature. This is the lungs of the planet. We live in a biosphere. Anything that happens someplace is going to affect us, right? Everywhere else. What did the president of Brazil say? This is our sovereign territory. Let's be clear. This was the new biosphere understanding challenging the old geopolitics. But what President Macron could have said is, why are those trees burning in the Amazon? Why are they burning them down? He didn't ask that. They're burning them down to get 6 inches of topsoil to graze a cow for the beef on the French plate. I love cows. My wife and I are animal rights activists. I've learned everything from her. We are really animal rights activists. I love cows. But there are 1.3 billion cows. They take up 27% of the ice-free landmass. Their methane is 24 times more powerful per molecule than CO2. Their nitrous oxide in their feces is 288 times more powerful. And here's the rub, which Macron could have said. We have lost 60% of the topsoil now because of petrochemical farming, toxics, overproduction. 60% gone. Takes 1,000 years to gain 1 inch. And guess what? 1/2 of the agricultural land still left in the world is growing feed grain, mostly for cows. And it takes 10 times more acreage to get that beef than you would get with legumes with the same protein. We're not going to have a choice. People say, oh, you're messing up with my diet. The only way we're going to feed the planet is to take that half that's in feed grain and put it into legumes, or we're dead. So we would rather die. Well, first of all, we're going to die from heart attacks and cancer from all the beef, but that's secondary. But we're willing actually to die to have the hamburger? So what these young people are learning is biosphere consciousness. They're learning carbon footprint. They're learning that everything we do affects everything else. It's a cruel lesson because climate change taught us this, but it's the silver lining. And I will leave you with, I think, is why I'm guardedly hopeful. I'm never optimistic or pessimistic. I'm guardedly hopeful for a couple of reasons. One, we put out the first industrial revolution in my country from 1860 to 1890. We did it all. We put in a transcontinental railroad across the frontier, telegraphs across the frontier. We seeded a third of the public land for homesteading for millions of people for the built environment. We put in these great big public universities to train the workforce. We did that in 30 years. We did the second industrial revolution in 25 years, from 1908 to 1932. At least we urbanized. In the urban areas, we put electrification and telephones. We put out the automobiles, at least for urban areas. We put in the highway systems. We put in the gas and oil pipelines. We did it in 25 years, and then we matured it after the war. We can do this third industrial revolution, Green New Deal infrastructure in 20 years, building off the other two. 10 years to put in the juvenile infrastructure, which will keep us in line with the United Nations plan to keep it under 1.5. Another 10 years to mature it, off carbon, not net zero, off fossil fuels. This can be done. So I really don't want anybody, wherever I go, I don't want anyone in Spain to say it's too late, it's over. And I don't want anyone to say there are other priorities. What other possible priorities could there be at this moment in history when we're moving to an extinction, a mass extinction? My God, what other priorities could there possibly be? Is this kind of a satire? And then the other issue is they say, let's be realistic. The young people don't want to hear about realism when everything they see has absolutely no realism to it, because the whole playbill has changed. What we need to do is we need leadership. And it's going to come from Spain, France, Italy, Germany. You will have so much solar and wind. Your regions know how to control their economic destiny. They're pretty autonomous here. And you know what Chancellor Merkel said that last part of the first meeting? Said, I love this distributed lateral plan for Germany because we are a federal republic. The regions control, and the national government sets the codes, the regulations, the standards, the alignment. Other countries, everyone's going to have to do it, but you're set for this. Your regions are strong. They know how to put infrastructure, set up the green banks, issue the green bonds, set up roadmaps with thousands of people in each region tomorrow morning. If Halt France could do this, why the hell can't it be done everywhere? And then the money will come. If we don't do it, where do we go? We're lost. Let the young people come forward, help them move this along. And I want to come back here in 2 years from now and know that this is happening. I don't want to say, well, that was an interesting lecture. And tomorrow morning, well, I've got to get the kids to school, and then I've got to go to work, and then I've got... No. If we're not all engaged in this with fearlessness and courage and stamina, we won't make it. Last thought. People say to me, well, how do you do this every day? I get up every day, and I'm raring to go, and I have hope. At the end of the day, I'm going to tell you, I'm kind of down and depressed because it takes so much to make this happen. Then the next day I get up, I have some coffee, and I have some hope. Everybody here, all of us, we're going to have to be fearless. If we really care about this experiment called life on Earth, we have to dedicate our lives to us wherever our careers are, our neighbors, our families, and our kids have to do this, and we have to do this together. The last reason I'm guardedly hopeful, we have the biggest neocortex of all the species, for good or bad. We are soft-wired in our neural circuitry for empathy. Empathy has evolved over history with infrastructures. Little forager hunter societies, their empathy only was to blood ties. 150 people, that's human beings. If you're in the next valley, you're a demon. You follow me? When they went to the great agricultural irrigation systems, like in Sumer, in this valley of India and China, when they brought thousands of people together, they weren't blood related, they had to create a new fictional family. It was called the Great Religions. I'm Jewish. Everyone who was Jewish began to think they were brothers and sisters. First generation Rome, all the people coming in from across the empire, they became Christians in the family of Christ, and they kissed each other as brothers and sisters. In the first industrial revolution, we created a fiction called the nation state, common celebrations, common language. None of that existed before. And then all French people kiss French people because they see themselves as brothers and sisters. They'll even die for each other on the battlefield. What I'm saying is there are dark periods when all of this collapses, but nonetheless, there's a spotty evolution of human consciousness that goes together with the larger collectivities we put together with our infrastructures. The young people now are connecting around the world, third industrial revolution infrastructure, and they're beginning to extend their empathy to their fellow human beings as one species, their fellow creatures as part of the family. This can happen. This needs to happen in Spain tomorrow morning. Good night.